All right, let's dive in. Today, we're focusing on India's power grid. We've got a pretty in-depth report here from Nomura all about their transmission and distribution sector.
Lots to unpack there.
For sure. And we know our listener wants to really understand the growth of that sector, so we're going to break down the most interesting points.
These are good.
We know India's power demand is set to skyrocket, something like over 7% growth every year.
Yeah. The next few years are going to be huge.
And not just for the usual reasons, right? We're talking data centers, the rise of electric vehicles.
And maybe the most interesting factor, green hydrogen.
Right. Green hydrogen. Huge potential there.
Nomura actually predicts it could add a whopping 150 to 300 terawatt hours to the demand.
Seriously. Wow. Okay, but before we get ahead of ourselves, I was looking back and it's fascinating how India's grid wasn't always this interconnected system. It used to be pretty fragmented.
Yeah. It's tough to imagine now, but in the 1940s, that was India's reality. Basically a patchwork of small, isolated grids.
Can you even picture trying to power a whole nation like that?
Not efficiently, that's for sure. Back then, the highest transmission voltage they had was just 132 kilovolts.
I see. So to send power any real distance, you need way higher voltages.
Think of it like a highway. Wider lanes mean more cars can travel smoothly. India needed to upgrade its power highways, big time.
Okay, that's a good analogy. So how did they go from that fragmented setup to the unified national grid they have now?
It was a gradual process. Starting in the 50s and 60s, each state began increasing its own grid capacity, adopting those higher voltages like 220 and 400 kilovolts.
Makes sense, so piece by piece.
Right. But then came a smart move, regional planning. India got divided into 5 regions, and each one had a board to coordinate power sharing between the states.
Ah, so collaboration was essential.
Absolutely. It opened the door for bigger power plants, the kind that needed to connect across regions, like weaving a massive power tapestry, you could say.
Love that visual.
Yep.
But there had to be some hiccups along the way, right?
Oh, definitely. Those regional grids, they were operating independently. Some even at different frequencies. Made power exchange a tricky business.
So like trying to merge traffic from different countries onto one highway, but everyone's driving on opposite sides of the road.
Chaotic, to say the least. But India found ways around it. HVDC links came into play.
Those are
high voltage direct current lines. They were the solution for connecting those mismatched grids. And by the early 2000s, most regions were synced up.
And things started flowing more smoothly.
Much more. Then finally, in 2013, the southern grid joined the party. That's when India got the unified national system we see today.
What a journey, from patchwork to powerhouse. So knowing that history, where is India's grid heading now?
Well, we're looking at unprecedented growth. The report predicts a 7% yearly increase in power demand just between fiscal year 24 and 27.
Wow, a multi-decade growth spurt. And lots fueling that growth.
A bunch of factors, yeah. We talked about data centers, electric vehicles, and green hydrogen. Plus, basic economic development plays a role.
And it's not just businesses and industries, right? People's everyday lives are getting more electrified, too.
Absolutely. More appliances, electric transportation options. This global trend puts a ton of pressure on grids to keep pace.
No doubt. And to meet all that new demand, India's going big on renewable energy, right? Lots of solar and wind power coming online.
Big time. The report highlights how solar and wind are predicted to handle a full 75% of that increased demand by 2025. It's a serious commitment to clean energy.
That's amazing, but I have a feeling there's a but coming.
There is. While India's ramping up those renewables at an incredible pace, their grid is struggling to keep up.
Ah, I see the problem. It's like trying to squeeze a fire hose through a straw.
Pretty much. The report says there are over 3,000 gigawatts worth of renewable projects stuck, just waiting for grid connections.
That's a serious backlog. So what's the plan to fix that?
The government has a plan. The National Electricity Plan, or NEP for short. Think of it as the roadmap for modernizing and expanding India's grid.
So let's break down this NEP. What are the key points?
Well, one big focus is boosting capacity with higher voltage levels. We talked about how India already went from 132 kilovolts up to 400, even 765. The NEP aims to go even higher to cut down energy loss during transmission.
Got it. Supersizing those power highways to handle all the extra traffic, but it's more than just expanding, right?
Absolutely. The NEP knows renewable energy has its own quirks. Solar and wind power, they're intermittent. Their output depends on the weather, which can create some instability for the grid.
So it's not as simple as just plugging in more solar panels?
Nope. You need smarts. The NEP focuses on smart grid tech and solutions to handle those fluctuations, making sure the power supply stays reliable.
So it's like giving the grid a brain, helping it anticipate and adjust to changes in power flow.
Exactly. It's all about agility. The report highlights the NEP's three main goals: stability, reliability, and sustainability.
A holistic approach to grid modernization, for sure. So what does that mean in terms of actual upgrades? How big are we talking?
Huge. The NEP outlines a planned increase of 11,158 gigawatts in transformation capacity, and the transmission network itself is set to grow by 3.7%, all by 2032.
Okay, now those are some serious numbers. But it's not just building new stuff, right?
Right. Optimizing what's already there is crucial. For perspective, India currently has 2.3 MVA of transmission capacity per megawatt of generation. The goal is 7 MVA. That's a significant gap.
Wow, a lot of work to do. And the report mentioned private companies getting involved too.
Yeah, the government's encouraging private participation in the transmission sector to speed things up. It's all hands on deck for this massive undertaking.
Makes sense. And speaking of exciting developments, the report highlighted some really cool tech shaping India's grid. Hybrid substations, for one. I was intrigued by those.
They're a pretty cool innovation. Hybrid substations combine traditional air-insulated switchgear with the newer, more compact gas-insulated switchgear. Best of both worlds.
I see. So what's the advantage of that?
Well, you need less space, which is always a plus. Plus, they're safer and more cost-effective over time.
So it's a win-win-win.
Pretty much. And then there's these digital substations, which sounds straight out of a sci-fi movie.
Yeah, what's the deal with those?
Digital substations use digital sensors and communication tech to monitor and control everything. It allows for real-time data analysis, predictive maintenance, really cutting edge.
So it's all about making the grids smarter and more responsive.
Exactly. Power Grids actually implemented a 400 kV digital substation in Punjab, a real pioneer in that space.
That's impressive. Okay, so we've got this massive grid expansion, lots of cool tech coming into play, but surely there have to be some challenges too, right?
Of course. Expanding a grid on this scale is complex. One major hurdle for India is delays caused by bureaucracy.
The infamous red tape, never easy to escape.
Unfortunately, no. Things like forest clearances, right-of-way disputes, land acquisition, and even contractual issues, they can all hold things up significantly.
So it's not just about technology, it's navigating those administrative roadblocks too.
Definitely. But the government's working on it. They have initiatives like CEA's Power System Project Monitoring Division trying to streamline those processes.
Good to know they're on it. Now let's zoom out a bit. What's happening with electricity grids globally? Is India unique in this rush to build out its grid?
Not at all. Electricity grids are undergoing a massive transformation globally. We're seeing growth and modernization everywhere.
What's driving that?
Lots of things. Rising electricity demand, the push for renewable energy, and the switch to electric transportation are all playing a role.
So India's not alone in this race to build the grid of the future?
Not even close. Actually, the global grid length is predicted to double by 2050.
Wow. And who's leading the pack?
Probably not a surprise, China.
Figures much.
They've been building like crazy over 500,000 kilometers of transmission lines in just the past decade, especially those ultra-high voltage lines connecting their eastern population centers with the renewable energy hubs out west.
It's interesting to see how different countries are approaching this. Some focusing on new grids, others upgrading what they have.
Definitely. And within this global context, one technology is becoming super important: high voltage direct current transmission, HVDC.
Okay, break that down for me. Why is HVDC such a big deal for the future of grids?
HVDC is perfect for long-distance power transfer. It loses less energy compared to the traditional AC way of doing things.
So it's super efficient.
Especially for countries like India, where those renewable sources are often far away from the big cities that need the power. And the numbers prove it. Global HVDC line length has tripled since 2010.
So it's like a super highway for clean energy.
Exactly. A technology to watch for sure. But let's talk about the elephant in the room. All this new infrastructure doesn't build itself. What's the situation with the electricity grid supply chain? The supply chain is facing some serious challenges. Demand for components like transformers and conductors is through the roof, and manufacturers are struggling to keep up.
And then there are those raw material issues, right? I've heard about shortages of copper, aluminum.
Even specialized steel, yeah. They're all crucial for grid infrastructure.
Yeah.
Copper is a great conductor, but it's heavy and expensive. Aluminum is cheaper and lighter, but not as good at conducting conductors.
Classic trade-off.
Right. Plus, there's growing demand for those specialized conductors, the high-temperature, low-sag kind. Those are designed to work even in intense heat. which is becoming more and more important with climate change.
So it's a fascinating mix of engineering and material science driving this whole grid transformation.
For sure. It's not just about the materials. It's the manufacturing processes, the skilled workers needed to produce all these complex parts. And of course, we can't forget about the sustainability aspect.
Right. Building all this new infrastructure has an environmental impact.
Absolutely. The report emphasizes using eco-friendly materials, minimizing waste during production, and even recycling and repurposing old grid components.
Good to see sustainability woven into the whole process. But back to the supply chain issues. What's causing these bottlenecks?
A few things. The COVID pandemic really shook up global supply chains, messing with production and transportation. And then the geopolitical tensions, like the Russia-Ukraine conflict, haven't helped.
A perfect storm of global events and existing issues within the supply chain itself.
Exactly. And the huge demand for grid infrastructure is only making things tougher. The report points out that lead times for key components like transformers are way longer now. What used to take months can take over a year.
Wow, those delays must have a domino effect on all these grid projects, pushing back timelines, driving up costs.
Definitely. It highlights the need for a more resilient and diverse supply chain. Countries can't rely on just one source for everything anymore.
So what are some of the solutions being explored to address those vulnerabilities?
One big idea is promoting domestic manufacturing. Lots of countries, including India, are giving incentives to companies that set up production facilities within their borders.
Bring those supply chains closer to home? Right.
Exactly. Plus, it creates jobs and boosts local economies. It's a win-win.
Now, we've talked a lot about challenges. Let's switch gears to the exciting stuff. Are there any new technologies or trends on the horizon that could revolutionize how grids are built and operated?
Absolutely. The report highlights a bunch of fascinating innovations that could completely transform things. One particularly promising area is superconductors.
Superconductors. Okay, now we're talking. What's so special about those?
Superconductors can conduct electricity with zero resistance.
Zero, meaning no energy loss during transmission.
None. It can completely change how we move electricity. Imagine sending power across vast distances with basically no loss.
That would be a game changer for renewable energy, especially for connecting those far-flung solar and wind farms to where people actually live.
Exactly. And they can make grid components like transformers and cables much more efficient and compact.
So a smaller footprint for grid infrastructure, too.
Right. But there's a catch. Right now, they need extremely low temperatures to work, which is tricky and expensive.
So it's a work in progress, but with huge potential. What other innovations are there?
Another one that's getting a lot of buzz is microgrids.
Microgrids. Fill me in.
Microgrids are like mini, self-contained power systems that can operate independently of the main grid. Usually they have a mix of energy sources, like solar panels, wind turbines, maybe even small generators, plus energy storage and control systems.
So like a personal power plant, basically. Why would someone want that instead of just being connected to the main grid?
A few reasons. They're great for resilience, especially in areas where power outages happen a lot. If the main grid goes down, your microgrid keeps those essential things running.
So it's a backup power system that's also sustainable and maybe even cheaper in the long run.
Exactly. And they're great for integrating renewable energy. They generate and use power locally, easing the burden on the main grid and smoothing out those fluctuations from solar and wind.
So they're a key part of moving towards a cleaner, more decentralized energy system.
Absolutely. They're a big part of what's called the smart grid, which is another fascinating development.
Smart grids. I hear that term a lot, but to be honest, I'm not sure I totally get it. What makes a grid smart?
A smart grid is like a modernized grid that uses digital tech and advanced communication systems to make everything run better. It's about efficiency, reliability, and responsiveness.
So you're giving the grid a brain so it can adjust to changes in supply and demand instantly.
Perfect way to put it. Smart grids can monitor everything in real time, predict potential problems, and automatically reroute power to avoid disruptions.
It sounds incredibly complex.
It is. Smart meters are one basic element. They allow two-way communication between utilities and consumers, providing real-time data on energy use.
So you can see exactly how much energy you're using and when, and even make adjustments to save money or lower your carbon footprint?
Right. And they allow for dynamic pricing, where electricity prices change based on supply and demand.
So it encourages people to use less power during peak hours when it's more expensive.
Exactly. And then you've got those advanced sensors and monitoring systems feeding a constant stream of data on grid conditions so operators can be proactive.
like having a team of doctors keeping tabs on the grid's vital signs.
Love that analogy.
Mm.
And then there's the role of data analytics and artificial intelligence, AI.
I figured AI had to be involved somewhere.
It's everywhere. In this case, AI algorithms analyze tons of data from those smart meters, sensors, weather forecasts, everything. They predict demand, optimize power flow, and can even spot potential problems before they happen.
So it's all about making the grid smarter and more resilient.
Precisely. And as AI keeps getting better, we can expect even more sophisticated applications in the future.
It's really incredible, but like with any new technology, there must be some risks too.
For sure. One big concern is cybersecurity. With so much data flowing around, security is paramount. A hacker-caused grid outage would be a disaster.
Oh, I can imagine.
And then there's data privacy. Those smart meters collect a lot of information about your energy habits. So responsible data handling and protecting consumer privacy are crucial.
So it's a balancing act between innovation and security and efficiency and privacy.
Absolutely. Something everyone involved, policymakers, utilities, tech companies, needs to work on together.
Well, it's clear that the future of electricity grids is going to be shaped by a ton of factors. Technology, supply chains, policies, sustainability, it's all connected.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's a fascinating time to be watching the energy sector evolve. It's challenging, but also really exciting.
My brain is buzzing. We've gone from the nuts and bolts of transformers to the mind-blowing potential of superconductors and smart grids.
And we've only just begun.
We'll be back in a flash to continue our deep dive into India's electrifying future.
And we're back, ready to keep exploring India's power grid.
You know, thinking about those companies we discussed, CG Power, GE Vernova, T&D, India, Power Industries, they're all facing this massive surge in demand for grid components. I imagine that puts huge stress on the whole supply chain.
Absolutely. And the report really dives into those supply chain challenges. It's a global issue, not just in India.
Okay, so what are some of the components that are in highest demand?
Transformers are a big one, essential for regulating voltage and making long-distance transmission possible. And the demand is exploding right now with all these grid expansion projects happening around the world.
Right, and building transformers requires specialized materials. I remember reading about CRGO steel, something about its magnetic properties.
Exactly. CRGO steel is crucial for transformer cores, which are basically giant electromagnets. It has this property called high permeability, meaning it magnetizes easily. But the supply of CRGO steel is limited. It mostly comes from a handful of countries like China, Japan, and some European nations.
So that's a potential bottleneck right there.
Yep.
What about conductors? Those are the actual wires that carry the electricity.
Right, and there's a huge variety of conductors depending on the voltage and the environment they need to operate in. Copper has always been the go-to because it conducts electricity so well, but it's heavy and expensive. Aluminum is a good alternative. It's lighter and cheaper, but not quite as conductive.
So another trade-off between performance and cost.
Exactly. And there's also this growing demand for specialized conductors, the high-temperature, low-sag kind. They're designed to work even in really hot conditions, which is important as temperatures rise due to climate change.
Makes sense. It's amazing to see how material science is playing such a key role in all of this.
It really is. And it's not just the materials themselves, it's the manufacturing processes and the skilled labor needed to make these complex components.
Right. The human element is essential. I'm guessing the report also talked about the sustainability aspect of all this. After all, building new infrastructure has an environmental impact.
For sure. The report highlights the importance of eco-friendly materials, minimizing waste during manufacturing, and even looking at ways to recycle and repurpose old grid components.
Good to see that sustainability is a key consideration. Now, back to the supply chain issues. What are some of the factors contributing to these bottlenecks?
Well, the COVID-19 pandemic threw a wrench into things, disrupting production and transportation globally. And then the geopolitical tensions, like the war in Ukraine, added more complications.
So a combination of global events and pre-existing issues within the supply chain.
Exactly. And with demand skyrocketing, it's just exacerbating the problem. The report notes that lead times for key components have increased dramatically. Something like a transformer that used to take a few months to procure might now take over a year.
Wow, that's a significant delay. And I imagine those delays have a ripple effect, pushing back project timelines and increasing costs.
Absolutely. It really underscores the need for a more resilient and diversified supply chain. Relying on just one or two sources isn't sustainable anymore.
So, what are some of the strategies being explored to address this?
One idea gaining traction is encouraging more domestic manufacturing. Many countries, including India, are incentivizing companies to set up production facilities within their borders.
So, bringing those supply chains closer to home and reducing reliance on imports.
Right. Plus, it creates jobs and boosts the local economy. It's a win-win.
Now, we've talked a lot about the challenges. Let's look at the more exciting side. Are there any emerging technologies that could revolutionize how we build and operate electricity grids in the future?
Definitely. The report highlights some really fascinating innovations. One that stands out is superconductors.
Superconductors. Okay, now you've got my attention. What makes them so special?
Superconductors can conduct electricity with zero resistance.
Zero. You mean no energy loss during transmission?
Exactly. It's a game changer. Imagine sending power across vast distances with virtually no loss.
It would be a revolution for renewable energy, connecting those remote solar and wind farms to cities thousands of miles away.
Right. Plus, superconductors could lead to smaller and more efficient grid components like transformers and cables. But right now, the technology requires extremely low temperatures, which is expensive and complex.
So a lot of potential, but still some hurdles to overcome. What other innovations are on the horizon?
Another area gaining traction is microgrids.
Microgrids. Tell me more.
Microgrids are like self-contained power systems. They can operate independently from the main grid. They usually have a mix of energy sources, like solar panels, wind turbines, maybe even small generators, along with some energy storage and control systems.
So it's like having your own mini power plant. Why would you want that instead of just being connected to the main grid?
Well, for one, they're great for resilience. If the main grid goes down, a microgrid can keep critical infrastructure running. They're like a backup power system, but one that's sustainable and potentially more cost-effective over time.
I see. And they can help integrate more renewable energy too, right?
Exactly. By generating and using power locally, microgrids reduce the strain on the main grid and help smooth out those fluctuations from solar and wind power.
So they're a key part of moving towards a cleaner and more decentralized energy system.
Absolutely. They're a building block of the smart grid, which is another really interesting development.
Okay, let's talk about smart grids. I hear the term all the time, but I'm not sure I fully grasp it. What makes a grid smart?
A smart grid is essentially a modernized grid that uses digital technologies and advanced communication systems to optimize its operation. It's about making the grid more efficient, reliable, and responsive to changes in demand.
So it's like giving the grid a brain, allowing it to adjust to changes in real time.
That's a great way to put it. Smart grids can monitor conditions in real time, predict potential outages, and automatically reroute power flows to avoid disruptions.
It sounds incredibly complex. What are some of the key components?
Well, smart meters are a fundamental part. They enable two-way communication between utilities and consumers, providing real-time data on energy use.
So instead of just getting a bill at the end of the month, you can see exactly how much energy you're using at any given moment, and maybe even make adjustments to save money or reduce your carbon footprint.
Right, and smart meters allow for dynamic pricing, where electricity prices fluctuate based on supply and demand.
That makes a lot of sense. It could encourage people to shift their energy use to off-peak hours when demand is lower.
Exactly. Then you've got those advanced sensors and monitoring systems that provide a constant stream of data on grid conditions so operators can stay ahead of any potential problems.
It's like having a team of doctors monitoring the grid's vital signs, making sure everything is functioning properly.
Love that analogy. And of course, we can't forget the role of the data analytics and artificial intelligence.
AI seems to be everywhere these days. How is it being used in smart grids?
Well, AI algorithms can analyze massive amounts of data from smart meters, sensors, and weather forecasts to predict energy demand, optimize power flows, and even detect potential faults before they happen.
So it's all about using data to make the grid smarter, more efficient, and more resilient.
Precisely. And as AI technologies continue to advance, we can expect even more sophisticated applications.
It's really incredible to think about the possibilities. But like any new technology, there are also potential risks.
Of course, cybersecurity is a big concern. With so much data being transmitted and analyzed, it's crucial to have robust security measures in place to protect against cyber attacks.
A grid outage caused by hackers would be a nightmare.
It certainly would. And then there are concerns about data privacy. With smart meters collecting all that detailed information on energy use, we need to ensure that data is handled responsibly and that consumer privacy is protected.
So striking that balance between innovation and security, and between efficiency and privacy, will be crucial as smart grids evolve.
Absolutely. It's something that policymakers, utilities, and technology providers need to work on together.
Well, it's clear that the future of electricity grids is going to be shaped by a complex interplay of factors, from technological advancements and supply chains to policies and sustainability considerations.
You've summed it up perfectly. It's a fascinating and challenging time for the energy sector, full of both opportunities and risks.
My brain is buzzing with all these insights. We've covered a lot of ground in this segment, from the nuts and bolts of the supply chain to the mind-blowing potential of superconductors and smart grids.
It's been quite a journey.
And we're not done yet. We're going to shift gears in the next segment and look at some of the broader implications of this electrifying future. We'll be back in a moment.
And we're back for the final leg of our deep dive into India's power grid.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
It really has. We've covered so much ground.
From those early days of fragmented grids to the incredible tech that's shaping the future.
You know, talking about all those innovations, superconductors, smart grids, it makes you realize this is way more than just infrastructure. It's a whole new way of thinking about energy.
Absolutely. It's a fundamental shift.
Right. We're moving away from that old centralized system, big power plants burning fossil fuels.
Towards a more decentralized, renewable-powered future.
Exactly. And the grid is right at the heart of that transformation.
It has to be. It's the connecting piece.
It's like the grid is evolving. It used to be a one-way street, power flowing from those big plants to consumers.
Now it's becoming a multi-lane highway, traffic going in both directions. I like that analogy. With all these rooftop solar panels, home batteries popping up, people are becoming producers and consumers of electricity at the same time.
It's a whole new energy ecosystem, much more dynamic and interactive.
So what does this mean for all the players involved, the utilities, policymakers, even us regular consumers? What are the challenges and opportunities?
Well, for utilities, it's a big shakeup. They have to adapt their business models to handle all these distributed energy resources.
It's not just about delivering power from a few central sources anymore.
Right. They have to figure out how to manage all these decentralized power sources, make sure the grid stays stable, and how to compensate people who are generating their own electricity.
Sounds like a lot to figure out.
It is, but it also presents a huge opportunity. Utilities can get creative, develop new services that work in this more decentralized world.
Services that cater to a more engaged customer, right? One who's more involved in their energy choices.
Exactly. And policymakers have a crucial role to play too.
How so?
They need to create policies that encourage investment in renewables and grid modernization. But at the same time, they have to ensure consumer protection and keep the grid reliable.
It's a balancing act for sure. Promote innovation while keeping everything stable and secure.
Right. And then there are things like energy equity and access to think about, making sure everyone benefits from this energy transition, not just a select few.
So it's complex, but it feels like a huge opportunity for positive change too.
Absolutely. And this isn't just an India thing. It's happening globally. Countries around the world are facing these same challenges and opportunities.
We're all working towards the same goal.
A cleaner, more resilient, and more equitable energy future.
Well, I'm feeling pretty inspired by everything we've discussed. It's clear we're on the cusp of a major shift in how we power the world.
It really is a fascinating time to be watching the energy sector evolve. And who knows what other incredible innovations are just around the corner.
It makes you wonder, right? What will the grid look like in 10, 20 years? Maybe we'll be beaming solar power down from space.
Now that's a thought. But even without going that far, the pace of change is incredible. It's hard to predict exactly what the future holds.
Definitely. But one thing is for sure. This deep dive has given us a glimpse into that future.
We've seen how this transformation is impacting businesses, the environment, our daily lives. And we've explored those challenges and opportunities that come with building a more sustainable energy system.
So for our listener, we hope this has been insightful. We hope it sparked your curiosity to keep learning and exploring.
Because the future of energy is being written right now. And it's a story we're all a part of.
Thanks for joining us on this electrifying journey. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.